I'm Kelly, 32, and my cousin Megan has been my best friend since we wore matching overalls in kindergarten. In our family, I've always been the responsible one, the fixer, the one everyone turns to when they need help. For 5 years, I've been quietly paying my mother's medical bills, stretching my nursing salary to keep her afloat. But at our last family dinner, everything changed when my mother called me a desperate failure to my face, not realizing Megan was live streaming every word. Before I share how I finally stood up to my mum after all these years, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see what I did next. Growing up in our middle-class Seattle home, I always dreamed of becoming a doctor. I would bandage my teddy bears and give medicine to my dolls, completely convinced that healing others was my calling. My mother, however, had a different perspective on my dreams. "Don't set yourself up for disappointment, Kelly," she would say whenever I talked about medical school. "You've never been as smart as your cousins." Her critical nature was a constant in my childhood. When I brought home straight A's, she would ask why I didn't get extra credit. When I won second place in the science fair, she wondered aloud why I couldn't have worked harder for first. Nothing was ever enough, and I grew up believing that my best efforts were somehow fundamentally flawed. Everything got worse when my father left when I was 14. He just packed his bags one Tuesday afternoon and said he needed space. I later found out he had started a new family in Portland with his administrative assistant. My mother never recovered from this betrayal, and somehow I became the target for all her bitterness. "You look just like him when you smile," she would snap, and eventually I trained myself not to smile wide enough to show my dimples. I became smaller, quieter, always trying to avoid triggering her anger or disappointment. My self-esteem crumbled under the weight of being both my mother's emotional punching bag and her caretaker. Despite all this, I managed to get through nursing school. It wasn't medical school, but it was still in the healthcare field I loved. I worked 2 part-time jobs between classes, took out student loans that I'm still paying off, and graduated with honors. The day I received my nursing degree, my mother's only comment was, "At least you finished something, I suppose." Today, I work as a registered nurse at Seattle General Hospital in the intensive care unit. It's demanding work both physically and emotionally, but I find real purpose in helping patients through their most vulnerable moments. I've built a life that, while modest, is stable and meaningful. My small 1-bedroom apartment isn't fancy, but it's clean, cozy, and mine. My 10-year-old Honda has over 150,000 miles on it, but it gets me where I need to go. I've created a life I should be proud of, even if my family never seems to see it that way. 5 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune condition that requires expensive monthly treatments and medications. Her insurance covered only a portion, leaving her with nearly $2,000 in medical expenses every month. She called me crying after receiving the first bill, saying she would have to sell the house my father had left her. Without even thinking about it, I offered to help. "Just until you figure out a better insurance plan," I said, believing it would be temporary. 5 years and over $100,000 later, I was still paying $1,800 every month for her treatments, specialty appointments, and medications. The financial burden has been crushing. I've depleted my savings, maxed out 2 credit cards, and postponed my own needs countless times. I haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. My apartment's plumbing issues remain unfixed. My wisdom teeth, which have been causing me pain, still haven't been removed because I can't afford the dental work. Every month is a careful juggling act, robbing Peter to pay Paul, all while trying to maintain the appearance that I'm doing just fine. The emotional toll has been even worse than the financial one. Despite my sacrifices, my mother's criticism never abated. If anything, it intensified, as if my support entitled her to demand even more from me. The more I gave, the less it seemed to matter. Through all of this, my cousin Megan has been my lifeline. We grew up together, spending weekends at each other's houses and summers exploring the Pacific Northwest with our grandparents. Where I was cautious and eager to please, Megan was bold and outspoken. She pursued a career in social media and built a substantial following, sharing lifestyle content and social commentary. Her authenticity resonated with people, and she turned what started as a hobby into a successful career. Despite our different paths, we've remained incredibly close. Our weekly coffee meetups at a little cafe halfway between our apartments have been my emotional sanctuary. Megan is the only person who truly sees me, who doesn't want anything from me except my company and happiness. She's witnessed my mother's behavior firsthand and has gently suggested for years that I needed to establish boundaries. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm," she would tell me, but I wasn't ready to hear it. In our extended family, I'm known as the responsible one, the one who has it all together. Aunts, uncles, and cousins often turn to me for help with everything from medical advice to financial assistance. There's an unspoken expectation that I'll always be available, always ready to step in when needed. I've become so accustomed to putting others first that I barely remember what it feels like to prioritize my own needs. This pattern of seeking approval and avoiding confrontation has defined my adult relationships. I volunteer for extra shifts at the hospital, loan money I can't afford to lend, and swallow my objections when people cross my boundaries. All the while, a resentment grows inside me that I bury deeper with each passing year. I've become an expert at smiling through gritted teeth and saying, "No problem, happy to help," when inside I'm screaming. The invitation to our annual family gathering came via group text 3 weeks ago. Dinner at my place on the 15th, 6 p.m. sharp. Bring a side dish. My mother wrote, "No please or thank you, just the expectation of compliance." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over a polite excuse, before finally typing, "I'll be there." I didn't want to go. The thought of spending an evening being subtly criticized while watching everyone else receive praise made my stomach churn. But the alternative, dealing with the phone calls and guilt trips that would follow my absence, seemed even worse. In our family, attendance wasn't really optional, especially for me. My mother made sure everyone knew about her condition and my financial support, using it as both a badge of martyrdom for herself and a chain to keep me compliant. "Kelly will be there," she would tell relatives confidently. "She knows how much I need her support with my health issues." The subtext was clear: if I didn't show up, I was abandoning a sick woman who had sacrificed everything to raise me. As the dinner approached, my anxiety grew. I rehearsed neutral topics of conversation, planned responses to invasive questions about my love life and career, and even practiced a calm smile in the mirror. I picked out an outfit that was nice enough to avoid criticism, but not so nice that my mother would accuse me of showing off. Being around my family required a level of strategic planning that exhausted me before I even arrived. The financial strain of my obligations had been getting worse lately. Seattle General had announced budget cuts that meant fewer overtime opportunities. My rent had increased by $150 per month. The interest on my credit card debt was accumulating faster than I could pay it down. Each month, I found myself with less and less financial breathing room. I'd been living in the same small apartment for 6 years, postponing repairs and updates because I simply couldn't afford them. The carpet was worn thin in high-traffic areas, the kitchen appliances were outdated and inefficient, and the bathroom sink had a persistent drip that the landlord never fixed. My car made concerning noises that I pretended not to hear, knowing that a major repair would devastate my precarious budget. The week before the dinner, Megan and I met for our usual coffee. She immediately noticed something was off. "You look exhausted," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "What's going on?" Maybe it was her genuine concern, or maybe I had finally reached my breaking point, but suddenly I found myself telling her everything. The mounting credit card debt, the calls from collection agencies about medical bills I'd put off paying, the constant anxiety about how I would keep juggling these financial obligations. "Kelly, this isn't sustainable," Megan said, after listening to my tearful confession. "You're drowning yourself to keep your mum afloat and she doesn't even appreciate it." "What choice do I have?" I asked. "She needs these treatments. I can't just let her suffer." "There are other options," Megan insisted. "Medicare supplements, patient assistance programs, payment plans directly with the providers. Your mum is an adult who was managing her own finances before you stepped in. You need to set some boundaries before this destroys you." The word boundaries made me physically uncomfortable. In our family, boundaries were seen as selfishness, as putting your own needs above the collective good. The thought of telling my mother I couldn't keep paying her medical bills filled me with such intense guilt and fear that I changed the subject. Despite my financial struggles, I spent hours searching for the perfect gift for my mother. I finally settled on a silk scarf from a designer she had mentioned, admiring one that cost nearly $300 money I absolutely could not spare. I put it on my nearly maxed out credit card, telling myself that maybe this time she would actually appreciate the gesture. I had a long history of my gifts being dismissed or returned. The sweater that was not really my color, Kelly. The spa certificate that went unused because those places are just overpriced and pretentious. the framed photo of us that was put in a drawer because it made her look old. Still, I kept trying, hoping that the perfect gift would finally earn me the warmth and appreciation I craved. The morning of the dinner, I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach. I spent extra time on my appearance, knowing it would be scrutinized. As I was about to leave, my phone chimed with a text from my mother. "Can you stop and pick up some extra dinner rolls and maybe a better dessert than last time?" "No, please. No offer to reimburse me for the extra expense." Almost simultaneously, the mail arrived with yet another medical bill, this one for an MRI my mother had neglected to tell me about in advance. $567 that I had no idea how to pay. I sat on my bed, bill in hand, and seriously considered not going to the dinner. I imagined the relief of texting that I was sick of having an evening alone in my apartment instead of walking into the emotional minefield that awaited me. But years of conditioning won out. I put on my coat, grabbed the beautifully wrapped scarf, and headed out to pick up dinner rolls and dessert before driving to my mother's house. My mother's suburban home looked just as it always had, a tidy 3-bedroom ranch-style house with meticulous landscaping that I helped pay to maintain. Her pride in this house was evident in every carefully chosen exterior paint color, every manicured shrub. It was her symbol of stability after my father left proof that she could maintain appearances despite her personal tragedies. I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching relatives arrive with dishes and gifts. My Aunt Lisa and Uncle Paul pulled up in their new luxury SUV. My cousin Stephanie arrived with her husband and their perfectly dressed children. Through the front window, I could see people greeting each other, warmly laughing and embracing. I took a deep breath, gathered my offerings, and approached the front door. "There she is, our Kelly," my Aunt Lisa called as I entered, air-kissing my cheek. "Always rushing in from Saving Lives, I bet. We were just saying we don't see enough of you these days." My Uncle Paul clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Still driving that old Honda, huh? You know I could get you a great deal on a newer model if you ever decide to upgrade." Before I could respond, my mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Kelly, finally. Put the rolls in the bread basket and help me with the salad." No hello, no thank you for the extra food I'd brought, just immediate instructions. I handed her the gift bag with the scarf. "I got you something. I thought you might like it." She peered inside, pulled out the scarf halfway, and gave a small nod. "It's nice. You really shouldn't spend money on things like this, though." She placed the bag on a side table without taking the scarf out completely or trying it on, then turned back toward the kitchen. I followed, swallowing my disappointment. The house was full of relatives showcasing their accomplishments and adventures. My aunt described their recent European vacation in exhaustive detail. My uncle talked about his golf membership at an exclusive club. My cousin Stephanie made sure everyone knew about her recent promotion to senior marketing director. Each story seemed designed to highlight the contrast with my own modest life. "So Kelly," my aunt asked, as we gathered in the living room, "are you seeing anyone special these days? You're not getting any younger, you know." "Still focused on my career right now," I replied with the practiced answer I always gave to this question. "Career is important," my uncle chimed in, "but family is what really matters in the end. You don't want to end up alone." My mother shook her head slightly. "Kelly has always been very independent. Too independent for most men, I think." The conversation mercifully shifted when Megan arrived fashionably late, as usual carrying a small equipment bag along with her potluck contribution. She gave me a warm, genuine hug and whispered, "I've got your back," before greeting everyone else. "Hope nobody minds, but I'm going to document tonight for my social media," Megan announced, setting up a small camera and tripod in the corner of the dining room. "I'm doing a series on family traditions and connections." This announcement was met with excitement from most of the family. My aunt immediately began fixing her hair. My uncle straightened his posture. Even my mother seemed pleased by the prospect of being featured on Megan's popular accounts. "Will we be famous?" my younger cousin Jamie asked with a grin. "Internet famous, maybe," Megan replied, adjusting her equipment. "I'll be live streaming to my followers. They love authentic family moments." I felt a flicker of unease but didn't say anything. Megan had always been respectful of my privacy in the past, and I trusted her judgment. Besides, the thought that other people would be virtually present made me hope that perhaps my family would be on their better behavior. As we moved to the dining table, I found myself seated right next to my mother, directly across from Stephanie and her husband. Megan positioned herself at the end of the table with a good view of everyone, her camera discreetly capturing the scene. The dinner began with the usual family news and gossip. Who was getting married? Who was expecting a baby? Who had bought a new house? My contributions to these discussions were minimal, partly because no one seemed particularly interested in my updates, and partly because I had little to share that would impress this crowd. Stephanie just closed that big account with the tech company, my mother announced proudly, though Stephanie wasn't even her daughter. They're sending her to their headquarters in Tokyo next month. It's a great opportunity, yes, Stephanie agreed. The company's covering all expenses and giving me a generous per diem. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. Congratulations. Kelly's hospital is having budget cuts, my mother added, though I hadn't shared this information with her. They're reducing staff hours, I believe. All eyes turned to me and I felt my cheeks grow warm. We're going through some reorganization, I said vaguely. It happens in healthcare. Such a shame, my Aunt Lisa sighed. After all that education too. My Uncle Paul turned the conversation toward my personal life. Any special man on the horizon, Kelly? My golf buddy has a son about your age, recently divorced but no kids, very successful in real estate. I'm really not looking to date right now, I said, pushing food around on my plate. At 32, my mother interjected. Kelly, you can't afford to be so picky. Not everyone gets to marry their first choice. I felt Megan watching me closely from across the table. She spoke up. Kelly's career is demanding. Not everyone needs to follow the same timeline for relationships. Easy for you to say at 29, my mother replied dismissively. Kelly doesn't have the luxury of time that you do. I focused intently on cutting my chicken into perfectly even pieces, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Megan occasionally adjusted her camera angle, reminding me that this uncomfortable exchange was being broadcast to her thousands of followers. Somehow, that thought provided a small comfort, knowing that someone outside our family bubble might see what I experienced. As the dinner progressed, my aunt began discussing her recent kitchen renovation. The imported Italian marble countertops were worth every penny, she said, sipping her wine. Sometimes you just have to indulge. We're thinking of taking a Mediterranean cruise next spring, my uncle added. Life's too short to not enjoy it while we can. My mother nodded approvingly. That sounds lovely. I've been looking into some new treatment options myself. There's a specialist in Portland who's having remarkable results with my condition. The out-of-pocket costs are significant, but health is worth the investment. I froze mid-bite, knowing exactly what was coming next. My mother had mastered the art of announcing expenses she expected me to cover without directly asking. The new specialist would undoubtedly be added to the list of bills that appeared in my mailbox. That's interesting, I said carefully. Have you checked if it's covered by your insurance plan? Only partially, she replied with a dismissive wave. But it's essential treatment. I can't put a price on my well-being. No, I thought bitterly, you just put the price on me. Not once during this conversation did my mother acknowledge that I was the one financing her current treatments, that I had been the one making her health worth the investment for 5 years. To everyone at the table, it sounded as though she was bravely managing her condition independently, making sacrifices for her own care. Kelly, how's that little apartment of yours? My aunt asked suddenly. Still in that building near the hospital. Yes, it's convenient for work, I replied. My mother made a small noise of disapproval. Such a tiny place. I worry about your safety in that neighborhood. It's perfectly safe, Mom, and it's what I can afford right now. Well, my mother said, looking around the table, we all make choices in life. Stephanie and Mark just bought that beautiful 4-bedroom in Magnolia. Your cousin Jamie is closing on his condo next month. She sighed dramatically. I always hoped you'd be settled in a real home by now. My apartment is a real home. I defended, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that appeared whenever my life choices were questioned. Of course it is, dear, she said in a tone that clearly indicated she thought otherwise. We all do what we can with what we have. I looked down at my plate, pushing a piece of broccoli through a pool of gravy. I like my apartment. It suits my needs. Kelly has always been content with less, my mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. Even as a child, she never reached for more. Not like Stephanie or Jamie. Mum, I said quietly, can we talk about something else? She ignored my request. I suppose there's a certain virtue in accepting one's limitations. Not everyone is meant for great achievement. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Even my aunt and uncle, who usually joined in these assessments of my life, seemed to sense that my mother had crossed a line. Megan shifted in her seat, her hand moving toward the camera as if considering whether to turn it off. What exactly does that mean? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. My mother took a sip of water, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of her glass. Just that you've always been well safe, cautious. You settled for nursing when you talked about medical school. You settled for that apartment, when you could have found a better place with roommates. You've settled for being alone rather than putting yourself out there. I felt heat rising in my face, a flush that I knew was turning my cheeks and neck bright red. My hands began to shake slightly, and I placed them in my lap beneath the table. "And you know what?" she continued, her voice taking on a casual, conversational tone that was somehow worse than anger. "There comes a point when cautious becomes cowardly, when settling becomes, well, I hate to say it, but a sign of being a desperate failure." The words hit me like a physical blow. I heard someone gasp softly, perhaps my aunt or one of my cousins. My uncle became intensely interested in his mashed potatoes. Megan's eyes widened, her gaze darting between me and her camera. "A failure," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, Kelly, don't look so shocked." My mother laughed as if she was simply pointing out something obvious that everyone already knew. "We all see it. You work so hard at that hospital, and for what? You're not advancing. You live in that sad little apartment. You have no partner, no children, no real assets to speak of." She reached for the bread basket, helping herself to one of the rolls I had purchased on the way over. "It's actually quite pathetic when you think about it. 32 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A job that overworks you, an apartment that's barely big enough to turn around in, and a car that's one breakdown away from the junkyard." She actually laughed while saying this, as if my life circumstances were an amusing anecdote to share over dinner. "Remember when Kelly thought she would be chief of surgery somewhere by now, and look where she ended up?" I sat perfectly still, unable to speak or move. The room seemed to recede around me, voices becoming distant and muffled. I was vaguely aware of Stephanie shifting uncomfortably in her seat, of Jamie staring down at his plate, of my aunt making a weak attempt to change the subject. But all I could focus on was my mother's face, the casual cruelty in her expression, as she dissected my life and found it wanting. This woman, whose medical care had consumed my savings and dictated my financial choices for 5 years, was laughing about how pathetic my life had become. And somewhere in the background, Megan's camera was capturing every word. Inside my chest, something was collapsing. My heart raced so fast I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My breathing became shallow, my palms clammy. The familiar symptoms of anxiety washed over me, but this time they were accompanied by something new, a clarity that cut through the panic like a beacon. As my mother continued her assessment of my failures, memories flashed through my mind in rapid succession. The time I'd skipped a desperately needed dental procedure because her insurance had denied a treatment. The weekend shifts I'd taken to cover an unexpected increase in her medication costs. The small vacation I'd cancelled when she required additional physical therapy sessions. I mentally calculated the total I'd spent on her care over 5 years, $1,800 per month for 60 months. $108,000. Plus the extras, the copays, the supplements. She insisted on trying the alternative treatments her doctor recommended that insurance wouldn't cover. Likely closer to $120,000 all told. $120,000 that could have been my house down payment, my retirement savings, my emergency fund, my wisdom teeth removal, my car repair, my life. And not once, not a single time in 5 years had she said thank you. Not once had she acknowledged the sacrifice. Not once had she considered that her pathetic daughter's circumstances might be directly related to supporting her. A part of me had always known this would never change, that no amount of sacrifice would ever be enough, that no achievement would ever measure up to her expectations. But sitting there, hearing her laugh about my failures to a table full of relatives who knew exactly what I had given up for her, something crystallized for me. This moment, this dinner, this conversation would repeat endlessly unless I changed it. Across the table, Megan's phone was lighting up with notifications. Her livestream audience was reacting to my mother's words, and from the look on Megan's face, they weren't taking my mother's side. She tilted her screen slightly in my direction, and I caught glimpses of comments scrolling by. Is this woman serious? After her daughter pays her medical bills, someone needs to stand up for Kelly. This is emotional abuse, plain and simple. I can't believe what I'm hearing. My mother remained completely oblivious to the virtual audience witnessing her behavior. She had moved on from critiquing my career and living situation to my appearance. And honestly, Kelly, that haircut isn't doing you any favors. It makes your face look even rounder than it is, and that blouse, the color just washes you out completely. Mum, I said quietly, but she continued as if I hadn't spoken. You had such potential when you were younger. Everyone said so. But potential doesn't mean much if you don't use it. Now look at you. Listen. She gestured vaguely in my direction. Wasted potential. That's the saddest thing of all. She turned to my aunt, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was clearly meant to be heard. I worry about her, you know. Who will take care of her when she's older? She can barely take care of herself now. Then turning back to me with an expression of practiced martyrdom. But of course we tolerate it. What else can a mother do? You're still my daughter, even with all your limitations. The final blow came casually, almost as an afterthought, as she reached for her water glass. Sometimes I don't know why you even bother showing up to these gatherings. It's not like you have anything new or interesting to contribute. In that moment, I felt something inside me that had been stretched to its breaking point for years finally snap. But instead of the emotional collapse I had feared for so long, I experienced a sudden, profound calm. The kind of clarity that comes when there's nothing left to lose, when the worst has already happened and you've survived it. I took a deep, steady breath. The room came back into focus around me. I was aware of every face turned toward me, of Megan's supportive gaze, of the camera silently recording in the corner. I felt oddly light, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but perfectly clear in the silent room. "Do you realize that Megan is live streaming this dinner right now?" "What?" she asked, the smug expression faltering slightly. "Megan's social media, the camera, it's not just recording, it's broadcasting live, right now, to thousands of people." "Well, yes," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. "She mentioned something about her followers." "What about it?" "It means," I continued calmly, "that everyone watching has just heard you call your daughter, who has been paying your medical bills for the past 5 years, a desperate failure and pathetic." Her expression shifted as the implication of my words sank in. "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly. "We were just having a family discussion. You know I only want what's best for you." "No," I said, still in that same calm voice that seemed to be coming from someone else entirely. "You meant exactly what you said. And now it's not just our family who heard it. Megan has over 50,000 followers." My mother turned to Megan, her face suddenly pale. "Turn that off right now. This is private family business." Megan didn't move toward the camera. "Actually, Catherine, I did announce at the beginning of dinner that I was live streaming. Everyone here agreed it was fine." "Well, I didn't understand what that meant," my mother snapped. "I didn't agree to have my private conversations broadcast to strangers." "The thing about live streams," Megan replied evenly, "is that they're live. What's been said has already been heard." My mother turned back to me, her expression now a mixture of anger and panic. "This is absolutely inappropriate, Kelly. Tell your cousin to delete that video immediately." "I don't think I will," I said, surprised by my own resolve. "In fact, I think it's long overdue that someone besides me hears how you really talk to your daughter." With a calm I never knew I possessed, I placed my napkin beside my plate and looked directly at my mother. "I've been supporting you financially for 5 years. I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Every month I pay $1,800 toward your medical care. That's nearly half my take-home pay." My aunt gasped softly. My uncle's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. Clearly, while the family knew I helped my mother, they had no idea of the extent of my financial support. "I've maxed out 2 credit cards covering your expenses," I continued. "I've postponed necessary dental work. I drive a car with 150,000 miles on it because I can't afford a replacement. I live in that tiny apartment you mock because every spare dollar I have goes to keeping you comfortable in this house." "Kelly, this isn't the time or place," my mother interrupted, her eyes darting nervously toward Megan's camera. "Actually, it's exactly the right time and place," I replied. "For 5 years, I've listened to you criticize my life choices without acknowledging that those choices were made so you could have care. For 5 years, I've endured your judgment while silently paying your bills, and I've just reached my limit." I gestured around the dining room. "Do you think I wouldn't love to have a beautiful home like this? Or take vacations, or save for retirement, or even just get my wisdom teeth removed? I've sacrificed all of that because you needed help, and not once, not one single time have you said thank you." "I shouldn't have to thank my own daughter for doing what family does," my mother replied defensively. "I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. And I've spent the last 5 years repaying that debt 100 times over," I said. "But it's never enough, is it? No matter what I give you, find ways to make me feel small and inadequate." "You're exaggerating," she scoffed. "This is just how families talk to each other." "No, Mom, it's not. This is how you talk to me. Only me." You praise Stephanie and Jamie for their accomplishments while treating my achievements as disappointing. You compliment everyone else at this table while finding fault with everything about me, from my job to my home to my appearance. My mother looked around the table, clearly expecting someone to come to her defense. But the family members who usually joined in her criticism of me were suddenly very interested in their dinner plates. You know what's truly pathetic? I asked quietly. Treating the person who supports you with such contempt. Mocking the financial limitations of someone who spends half their income keeping you comfortable. Laughing about my sad little apartment when it's small because I'm paying your mortgage. I never asked you to do all that, my mother said, playing the victim card she had perfected over the years. Really, Kelly, I don't know how I'll afford these treatments. Kelly, the insurance denied this procedure. Kelly, I might have to sell the house. What exactly did you think would happen when you said those things to me? Some family members were beginning to nod slightly, perhaps remembering instances when they had witnessed this dynamic. My Aunt Lisa cleared her throat. Catherine Kelly does have a point. You can be quite critical of her. Et to Lisa, my mother snapped. Now my own sister turns against me. Nobody's turning against you, my Uncle Paul interjected. But I've noticed it too. Kelly helps everyone in this family, not just you. Maybe we've all taken advantage of her generosity. My cousin Jamie spoke up unexpectedly. Remember when Kelly helped me pay my first month's rent after college, and when she drove Grandma to all her appointments when she broke her hip, and how she's always the one who remembers everyone's birthdays and sends gifts? I was momentarily stunned by this support, having expected to fight this battle alone. Megan caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging nod. I'm not going to continue enabling this behavior, I said to my mother, standing up from the table. Starting today, I am making changes. I'll help you find patient assistance programs and payment plans for your medical care, but I will not be paying your bills anymore. You can't be serious, my mother sputtered. You know I need those treatments. Yes, you do, and there are resources available to help you afford them without bankrupting me. I'll help you navigate the system, but I will not continue to sacrifice my financial future and emotional well-being to someone who treats me with such disrespect. This is about money after everything I've done for you. She was shifting strategies now, trying to make me the villain in this scenario. This isn't about money, I said firmly. This is about respect, about recognition, about gratitude. This is about the fact that love shouldn't require me to accept abuse. The word abuse hung in the air between us. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, she seemed to be at a loss for words. I love you, Mom, I said more gently. That hasn't changed and won't change, but the way we interact needs to change. I deserve better than what I've been accepting from you, and it's on me to establish that boundary. I began gathering my purse and jacket, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I'm going to leave now. When you're ready to have a conversation about how we move forward with mutual respect, I'll be available. Until then, I need some space to focus on my own well-being for a change. I looked around the table at my stunned relatives. I'm sorry if this was uncomfortable for everyone. It certainly wasn't how I planned to spend this evening. As I prepared to leave, Megan stood up as well. I think I'll head out too, she said, beginning to pack up her camera equipment. Thank you for dinner, Aunt Catherine. My mother recovered enough to make one last attempt. Kelly, don't be dramatic. Sit down and finish your dinner. We can discuss this privately later. And no, I said simply. We've had 5 years of later conversations that never happened. I'm done waiting. I walked to the front door, Megan close behind me. Before leaving, I turned back one last time. My mother sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of indignation and disbelief. Behind the anger, though, I caught a glimpse of something else: fear. Fear that this time I wouldn't back down. Fear that the dynamic she had controlled for so long was permanently changing. And for the first time in my adult life, I walked away from my mother with my head held high, feeling both terrible and strangely liberated all at once. In the safety of my car, with Megan beside me in the passenger seat, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to ebb. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, not yet starting the engine. I can't believe I just did that, I whispered, somewhere between laughter and tears. Did I really just do that? You absolutely did, Megan confirmed, reaching over to squeeze my arm. And it was long overdue, Kelly. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes. I feel like I'm going to throw up, or cry, or both. That's normal, Megan assured me. You just stood up to decades of conditioning. Your body is processing a lot right now. She held up her phone, showing me the stream of comments still pouring in from her followers. "Do you want to see what people are saying?" I hesitated, then nodded. She scrolled through dozens of supportive messages. "Kelly is my hero. That took incredible courage. Standing ovation for setting boundaries." I'm in tears watching this. I've been Kelly in my family for years. The way her voice stayed so calm while saying such powerful truths. "There are thousands of comments like this," Megan said. "People are sharing their own stories now, talking about how they've been in similar situations. You've inspired so many people to think about their own boundaries." I felt tears spilling down my cheeks, but they weren't entirely tears of distress. There was relief there too, and validation, and the strange lightness that comes from finally setting down a burden you've carried for too long. "What happens now?" I asked, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "Now we go get ice cream," Megan replied with determined cheer. "And then we start figuring out what Kelly's life looks like when it's actually Kelly's life." My phone began buzzing with texts and calls almost immediately. My mother, of course, but also other family members. I silenced it and placed it in my bag. "I can't deal with that right now." "You don't have to," Megan agreed. "They can wait. This is your moment to breathe." As we sat in the car, I experienced a swirl of contradictory emotions. Guilt at abandoning my mother warred with pride in finally standing up for myself. Fear about the financial consequences competed with excitement about possibilities that had seemed closed to me for years. I felt both incredibly vulnerable and strangely powerful. "I'm going to have to figure out a whole new way of relating to her, aren't I?" I asked. "Yes," Megan nodded. "And it won't be easy. She's not going to give up control without a fight." "I'm scared," I admitted, "but I think I'm more scared of going back to how things were." "That's how you know you made the right choice," Megan said. "Now start this car and let's go get that ice cream. Double scoops, with sprinkles, on me." The days following the dinner were as difficult as I had anticipated. My mother called and texted relentlessly, cycling through various emotional strategies. Anger, "How dare you humiliate me like that?" Guilt, "I'm not sleeping or eating because of the stress you've caused." Victimhood, "I guess I'll just stop my treatment since you've abandoned me." And finally, when none of these worked, grudging negotiation, "Perhaps we can discuss some kind of arrangement." Some relatives took her side, sending me messages about respecting your mother and family obligations. But surprisingly, others reached out with support. My Aunt Lisa called to say she had witnessed my mother's treatment of me for years and was glad I finally stood up for myself. My cousin Jamie invited me to lunch and apologized for not recognizing how much pressure I had been under. Megan was my rock through all of this. She helped me set up filters on my phone so I wouldn't be bombarded with my mother's messages. She came over with groceries when I was too emotionally exhausted to shop. She reminded me again and again that I wasn't wrong to establish boundaries. With Megan's encouragement, I made an appointment with a financial advisor to assess my situation. The picture wasn't pretty, 2 maxed out credit cards and minimal savings, but it wasn't hopeless either. We created a plan to gradually pay down my debt and start building an emergency fund. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine financial stability. I also started researching assistance programs for my mother. There were Medicare supplements, she qualified for pharmaceutical company discount programs, hospital financial aid options, and community resources I hadn't known about. I compiled all this information and emailed it to her, offering to help her apply, but making it clear that I would not be resuming financial support. 1 month after the dinner, my mother was still angry, but had begun reluctantly engaging with some of the resources I'd identified. She had sold her barely used exercise equipment to help cover costs, and had found a more affordable medication alternative her doctor approved. When we spoke on the phone, her barbs were still there, but seemed to have lost some of their power over me. "I suppose you're happy now that I'm having to scramble to pay my bills," she said during one call. "I'm not happy that you're struggling," I replied calmly. "I'm just no longer willing to struggle more than you are for your own care." This new pattern of interaction was uncomfortable for both of us. She would attempt to manipulate, I would calmly restate my boundary. She would get frustrated, and the conversation would end. But slowly, incrementally, something was shifting between us. I started seeing a therapist using the Employee Assistance Program at my hospital. In our sessions, I began unpacking the complex tangle of guilt, obligation, and yearning for approval that had defined my relationship with my mother. I learned that these patterns had roots in my childhood and had shaped my relationships with everyone, not just my family. "You're essentially rewiring neural pathways that were established decades ago," my therapist explained. "It's hard work and it won't happen overnight. Be patient with yourself when you backslide or when the guilt feels overwhelming. 6 months after the confrontation, my life had begun to transform in ways both small and profound. I had moved to a slightly larger apartment in a building with better amenities, one that cost just $100 more per month, but felt like a palace compared to my old place. I had started setting aside a small amount from each paycheck for a car replacement fund. I had finally gotten my wisdom teeth removed, ending years of intermittent pain. My relationship with my mother had reached a kind of détente. She had accepted, if not embraced, the new boundaries. We spoke once a week, usually briefly. She still made critical comments, but I had developed the ability to let them roll off me rather than pierce my heart. When she became too negative, I would calmly end the call, a consequence she had learned to anticipate. Some relatives remained distant, uncomfortable with the shift in family dynamic. Others, however, seemed to view me with new respect. My Aunt Lisa invited me to her book club. My cousin Jamie asked for advice about his career path. These small connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation felt precious to me. Megan's live stream of the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. With my permission, she had featured it in a series about family dynamics and boundary setting. Thousands of comments poured in from people who saw their own struggles reflected in mine. Some shared their own stories of finding the courage to break unhealthy family patterns. Others wrote that they were still working toward that moment of clarity and strength. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the years when all my energy went to work and caregiving. I joined a hiking group that explored trails around Seattle on weekends. I started taking a pottery class, something I had wanted to try since college, but had never had time for. My life began to expand beyond the narrow confines of obligation and work. The financial recovery was slower than the emotional one. Years of debt couldn't be erased overnight, but each month I watched the balances decrease slightly. I worked with the financial advisor to create a realistic 5-year plan that would eventually lead to stability and even some modest savings. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to think about what I wanted my future to look like. My mother and I established a new, more limited relationship. We still celebrated holidays together, though I now stayed in a hotel rather than her guest room. I helped her navigate healthcare systems when needed, but maintained my financial boundary. She complained about this arrangement frequently, but had adapted to it nonetheless. "I still think you're being selfish," she told me during a brief coffee meeting. "But I suppose you're entitled to make your own mistakes." "I appreciate your concern," I replied, a response I had practiced with my therapist. "I'm comfortable with my decisions." She studied me with narrowed eyes. "You're different now." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I am. The greatest change wasn't in my apartment or bank account, or even in my relationship with my mother. It was in how I viewed myself. I had spent decades believing I was responsible for everyone else's happiness and comfort, that my needs were secondary, that saying no was selfish. Dismantling those beliefs was the hardest and most rewarding work I had ever done. 1 year after that fateful dinner, I sat with Megan at our favourite coffee shop, celebrating what we now called my Independence Day. "If you could go back to that night," she asked, "would you do anything differently?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't think so. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't have continued the way things were going." "What would you say to someone else in your situation?" Megan asked. "Someone watching this who recognizes themselves in your story." I thought about all the lessons of the past year, the painful growth and the unexpected joys. I would tell them that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary, that helping others shouldn't require destroying yourself, that real love in any relationship has to include respect. I sipped my latte watching people pass by the window. And I'd tell them that the guilt and fear are normal, but they're not reasons to stay in a situation that's hurting you. Sometimes the hardest step is believing you deserve better. And you do deserve better, Megan affirmed. "Everyone does." "Yes," I agreed, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. "We all do." Looking back on that pivotal night when my cousin livestreamed my mother calling me a desperate failure, I realized it was the wake-up call I needed. The past 18 months have transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. My tiny apartment has been replaced with a comfortable condo I now own. My maxed-out credit cards have been paid off. I've even started dating someone who values my kindness without taking advantage of it. The healing journey hasn't been linear. There were days when guilt overwhelmed me, when I questioned my decision to withdraw financial support from my mother. There were tearful phone calls and tense family gatherings. There were moments when it would have been easier to slip back into old patterns than to maintain the uncomfortable new boundaries. But with each small victory, each time I recognized and interrupted unhealthy dynamics, my confidence grew. I learned to distinguish between genuine care and codependency, between generosity and self-sacrifice. I discovered that saying no didn't make me selfish, it made me honest. Through therapy, I came to understand that much of my people-pleasing behavior stemmed from childhood experiences. As the daughter of a critical mother and an absent father, I had developed the belief that love was conditional, that I had to earn affection through constant giving. Breaking this pattern meant confronting deep-seated fears of abandonment and unworthiness. I also had to learn how to recognize manipulative behavior. The guilt trips, the subtle put-downs, the comparisons designed to make me feel inadequate. These were all tactics I had normalized in my relationships. Developing the ability to identify these patterns was crucial to avoiding them in the future. Finding a community of support was essential to my healing. Beyond Megan and my therapist, I connected with support groups for adult children of emotionally immature parents. Hearing others share similar experiences helped me feel less alone and provided practical strategies for managing difficult family interactions. Rekindling friendships I had neglected was another important step. I reconnected with my college roommate Sarah, who had tried for years to tell me my relationship with my mother was unhealthy. I apologized for dismissing her concerns, and she welcomed me back into her life with open arms. These positive relationships served as models for what healthy connection could look like. I also rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of caregiving. I had always loved art, but had abandoned creative pursuits as impractical. Now my pottery hobby has evolved into a small side business, selling handcrafted mugs and bowls at local markets. The joy of creating something beautiful with my hands has been profoundly healing. My relationship with my mother has reached a sustainable equilibrium. We maintain contact but with clear boundaries. She still makes critical comments occasionally, but I no longer seek her approval or allow her judgments to define my worth. When she slips into old patterns, I calmly disengage rather than trying to please her or defend myself. The financial independence I've achieved has been liberating beyond words. Being able to make decisions based on my own needs and values rather than financial obligation has transformed how I move through the world. I've started contributing to retirement accounts, built an emergency fund, and even planned my first real vacation in over 6 years. Life isn't perfect. There are still challenges and difficult days. But the difference is that I now face these challenges as a whole person, not as someone whose identity is built around meeting others' expectations. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to others, it's about saying yes to myself. If you're watching this and recognizing your own story and mine, please know that change is possible. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. You deserve financial stability and the right to prioritize your own well-being. You deserve to break free from patterns that no longer serve you. The journey isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage to confront long-established dynamics, especially with family. But on the other side of that fear is a life that truly belongs to you, one where giving comes from abundance rather than obligation, where love doesn't require self-erasure. My story isn't about cutting ties or holding grudges. It's about finding the strength to establish healthier connections, to require respect as a condition of closeness. It's about recognizing that loving someone doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, and that helping others shouldn't come at the cost of your own well-being. If my experience resonates with you, I hope you'll share your own story in the comments below. Our shared experiences can be powerful sources of healing and inspiration for others walking similar paths. Please like this video if it touched something in you, subscribe to hear more stories of transformation, and share it with anyone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are worthy of respect, appreciation, and love that doesn't hurt.